My sister lied and told our mom I was selling drugs. My parents didn't believe me and kicked me out, and that was just the beginning. Years later, when I was older and planning my wedding, I didn't invite my sister. My parents claimed they couldn't attend either, blaming a family vacation they'd supposedly scheduled months ago. At the time, I was 17 and my half-sister, Cindy, had just turned 14. We'd grown up together, but there was always a strange, underlying tension between us, something I could never quite put my finger on. Cindy was my dad's daughter from his second marriage, and though nobody dared say it aloud, that separation was always there, like an invisible line drawn between us. The vacation, as far as I understood it, was meant to help us bond, or at the very least, give our parents a chance to relax without constantly refereeing our arguments. We stayed at this beach resort, the kind of place with endless pools, tall palm trees swaying in the breeze, and an almost picture-perfect atmosphere. For the first couple of days, it really did feel like an escape. But on the third day, things took a turn. Cindy and I were sitting by the pool. Our parents had gone off to some nearby market, leaving us to entertain ourselves. Cindy was glued to her phone, scrolling away without so much as acknowledging me. Honestly, we hadn't said a word to each other for about half an hour when she finally looked up. "So, do you even care that everyone thinks you're a total loser?" Cindy sneered, her tone dripping with sarcasm, like she was daring me to react. I blinked, caught off guard. "Well, what's that supposed to mean?" "Oh, come on," she said, rolling her eyes like I was an idiot. "You really think people don't notice? You just lurk around school, acting all weird. No friends. No life." It wasn't the first time Cindy had tried to take a jab at me, but this one cut deeper than usual. I fought to keep my expression neutral. "Well, I'd rather be alone than spend my time with people who just gossip and spread lies." I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. Cindy's smile spread slowly across her face, and it made my skin crawl. She'd been waiting for this moment. "You're so pathetic," she said, as if the words were an undeniable fact. "No wonder nobody likes you." I opened my mouth to respond, probably with something I'd regret later, but stopped myself. I knew it wouldn't matter. This was just another one of Cindy's games, and I was tired of playing. I stood up, shaking my head, and walked away, leaving her behind. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I noticed Cindy acting strangely. She was unusually quiet, which wasn't like her at all, and that smirk didn't leave her face. Every now and then, she'd glance at me with this glint in her eye, like she was holding onto a secret she couldn't wait to unleash. After dinner, I retreated to our shared room, planning to watch Netflix and put the day behind me. Cindy came in a few minutes later, her phone glued to her hands, fingers moving furiously across the screen. "What's so funny?" I asked, trying to sound casual, even though my gut told me something was off. Cindy looked up, her expression the perfect mask of innocence. "Oh, nothing. Just chatting with some friends." "Right?" I muttered, rolling my eyes. I wasn't about to get into it with her again, so I left it alone. The next morning, though, everything changed. My parents were acting strange, my mom especially. She kept giving me these uneasy looks, like she couldn't decide whether to believe something or not. I caught her whispering with my dad more than once. Finally, while my dad was busy getting coffee, my mom pulled me aside, her expression so serious it made my stomach drop. "Honey, we need to talk," she said quietly, her voice laced with concern. Is there anything you want to tell me?" "What? No. Why?" I stammered, a sense of panic creeping in. She hesitated, looking around as if someone might overhear us. "Cindy mentioned something, and I wanted to hear your side of things." My heart started pounding. "Mentioned what?" Mom sighed and glanced away for a moment before continuing, her voice barely above a whisper. "She said you might be mixed up in some bad things. Drugs. And maybe even—" She didn't finish the sentence, but I knew exactly what she meant. "Wait, what?" I nearly shouted. "That's insane. I would never—" why would she even say that? Mom's face stayed unreadable, which made it worse. Cindy said she heard it from some of her friends. "Her friends don't even know me," I protested, the anger bubbling up in my chest. "It's not true. You believe me, right?" Mom's expression softened, but only slightly. Sweetheart, this is serious. If there's anything you need to tell us, it's better to be honest. I felt sick. I knew Cindy had lied, but the terrifying part was that my parents believed her, even without a shred of evidence. That afternoon, I tracked Cindy down by the pool, my hands shaking with rage as I cornered her. What the hell did you tell Mom and Dad? Cindy didn't even bother looking up. Oh, you mean the truth? She said, the smirk still glued to her face. You know that's a lie. Why would you even say something like that? She looked up, calm as ever, and shrugged. Because it's what everyone already thinks. I'm just letting them know who you really are. For a moment, I wanted to scream, to shove her, to do something to wipe that smug look off her face. But I stopped myself. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Instead, I forced a breath through my gritted teeth. Fine, I said, but you'd better believe I'm not letting you get away with this. Cindy laughed and waved me off like I was nothing. Sure, whatever you say. The rest of the vacation was unbearable. My parents watched me with suspicion, like I was some stranger who couldn't be trusted. Cindy, on the other hand, practically glowed, the perfect little sister, so innocent and concerned. When we got back home, things only got worse. The rumor Cindy had started followed me to school, spreading like wildfire. I could feel the whispers behind my back, the judgment in people's eyes. My friends started pulling away, unsure of what to believe. Even the teachers looked at me differently, their questions suddenly carrying a weight they didn't have before. And Cindy? She didn't stop. She made sure to drop little comments whenever she could, just loud enough for others to hear. Oh, I heard she's making a lot of money, if you know what I mean. Or, I'd be careful around her if I were you. Every day became a nightmare, and no matter how much I denied it, the damage was done. One afternoon, I cornered Cindy at school, my anger barely in check. Why are you doing this? What did I ever do to you? Cindy gave me that same bored look, like I wasn't worth her time. Maybe I just don't like you. Or maybe I'm just bored. Who cares? I stared at her, speechless, realizing for the first time that there was no reasoning with her. This was a game to her, a sick, twisted game, and I was the pawn. I knew then that I had to fight back, but I had no idea just how far she was willing to go. After we got back from the vacation, I realized just how much damage Cindy had done. The tension at home went from bad to unbearable. It started with small things. Dad and my stepmom, Rachel, giving me those sidelong glances whenever I walked into a room, their expressions hard to read but filled with suspicion. It was as though Cindy's rumors had planted seeds of doubt in their minds, and now they couldn't look at me the same way. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was someone to be watched. One evening, just a few days after we returned, I walked into the kitchen and found my dad waiting for me. He was sitting at the table, Rachel next to him, and the look in his eyes, a mix of anger and disappointment, was like nothing I'd ever seen before. Sit down, he said, his voice tight, barely concealing his frustration. My heart pounded as I dropped into the seat across from them. I knew this was about the rumors, but I clung to a flicker of hope. Maybe they were finally ready to listen. Dad leaned forward, his eyes colder than I'd ever seen. We need to talk about what's going on with you. What's going on with me? I repeated, my voice small. Dad, I promise you, none of those rumors are true. Cindy's making everything up, and I don't even know why. Rachel let out a sigh, shaking her head like she didn't know what to believe. We want to believe you, she said softly, but Cindy says she has, well, evidence. Messages she's seen on your phone. People she's talked to. I felt my jaw drop. Messages? Evidence? My voice trembled with disbelief. She hasn't seen anything because there's nothing to see. I don't know who she supposedly talked to, but it's all lies. Dad's face hardened as he crossed his arms. You're old enough to understand the consequences of your actions. If there's anything you need to tell us, now's the time to be honest. We want to help you, but we can't if you don't admit what's really going on. I froze, stunned by how deeply Cindy's lies had taken root. These weren't my parents talking, at least not the ones I knew. They sounded like strangers. I don't know what Cindy's told you, I said, my voice shaking, but none of it is true. I swear I'm not doing drugs. I'm not involved in anything illegal. And I hesitated, the words tasting bitter as I forced them out. And I'm definitely not doing anything else she's accused me of. I'm your daughter. You know me. For a moment, Rachel's expression softened. But then she looked at Dad again, her face hardening like stone. We thought we knew you, she murmured, almost to herself. That was it. The dam broke. Tears stung my eyes as frustration, betrayal, and anger poured out all at once. This is all Cindy. She's doing this to hurt me. She's lying. Dad's face darkened, colder than ever before. Enough. Cindy's your sister. Why would she lie about something this serious? I wanted to scream, to shake them and make them see the truth. That Cindy wasn't the innocent kid they thought she was. But the harder I insisted, the deeper I seemed to dig myself into a hole. The real control started the next morning. When I woke up, I reached for my phone, only to find it missing. I tore my room apart, panic rising in my chest before finally storming downstairs. That's where I found Dad, holding my phone in his hand, his face unreadable. We're keeping your phone for a while, he said firmly, until you earn back our trust. I stared at him, speechless. What? You can't just take my phone. Rachel stepped in then, her voice overly calm. It's for your own good. You've clearly been involved with some unsavory people. This is just temporary, okay? I felt my hands clench into fists as fury bubbled up. So, you're punishing me for something I didn't even do? You're taking Cindy's word over mine? Dad didn't budge. Until we know we can trust you, there'll be no more secrets. No more sneaking around. From that day on, my life turned into a prison. Without my phone, I was cut off from my friends, unable to explain or even try to stop the rumors. At school, things were worse than ever. Everywhere I went, people whispered behind my back, shooting me looks like I was some kind of criminal. Even my teachers seemed different, their questions tinged with caution, their glances lingering a little too long. At home, Rachel turned into a constant shadow. She'd knock on my bedroom door every few hours under the pretense of checking in. If I stayed in the bathroom for even a minute too long, she'd come knocking again, asking if everything was all right. Dad was no better. He demanded to know where I was at every moment, texting Rachel to track me down if I took longer than expected. Then came the therapy sessions. Rachel had found a behavioral specialist named Dr. Foster, a calm older man with a soft voice and glasses that slipped down his nose every few seconds. At first, I thought maybe he'd actually listen to me. Maybe he'd help me prove my innocence. I was wrong. Dr. Foster's questions were just as condescending and suspicious as my parents. Have you felt pressured lately to experiment with things that might help you fit in? He asked during one session, glancing down at his notepad. No, I replied sharply, trying not to let my frustration show. I don't do drugs. I'm not selling anything. And I'm definitely not doing the things Cindy told my parents. He nodded, scribbling something down. And how would you describe your relationship with your sister? Non-existent, I shot back flatly. She hates me, apparently. Dr. Foster tilted his head, watching me like he was trying to analyze a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Do you think there's a reason for that? I stared at him, my anger bubbling up. Because she's trying to ruin my life, I said bluntly. I don't know why she's doing it, but she's lying, and no one seems to believe me. He just nodded again, scribbling away in his stupid notepad, clearly convinced I was hiding something. Each session left me feeling worse than before, more trapped, more misunderstood. Back at home, Cindy's influence over my parents only grew. I'd overhear snippets of conversations in hushed voices. Phrases like, out of control, or she needs help. They were talking about me like I was a problem to be fixed, like I wasn't even their daughter anymore. Then one night, I overheard Cindy talking on the phone with one of her friends. She didn't know I was listening, but her voice was low and dripping with smug satisfaction. She totally lost it today, Cindy whispered with a soft laugh. I thought she was going to cry in front of Dad and Rachel. A surge of anger so strong it felt like fire shot through me. I almost confronted her right then and there. I wanted to storm into the room and scream at Cindy, to confront her for everything she'd done. But I forced myself to stay quiet, to listen. It's like she actually thinks they believe her, Cindy continued, her voice low and dripping with mockery. But whatever, as long as she's out of the way. Out of the way. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Cindy wasn't just spreading rumors. She wanted me gone, out of the family, out of their trust, maybe even out of their lives altogether. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Why? What had I done to deserve this? I didn't know the answer, but I knew one thing. Cindy was determined to ruin me, and so far, she was succeeding. Over the next few days, I tried to stay invisible. I tiptoed around the house, keeping my head down, hoping my parents would eventually see through Cindy's lies. But instead, the control only got tighter. Rachel took away my bedroom door key, saying it was for safety reasons. Dad started driving me to and from school, insisting it was to keep me away from the wrong crowd. I felt like I was suffocating. Bit by bit, everything I had was being taken away, my freedom, my family, my reputation. Cindy had turned everyone against me, and no matter how hard I tried to defend myself, every word out of my mouth sounded like another excuse to their ears. By the end of the month, I felt like a ghost in my own home, a prisoner of Cindy's lies. I was desperate for a way out, for some way to make them see the truth. But with Cindy always one step ahead, watching my every move, I wasn't sure it was even possible anymore. I knew things were coming to a boiling point, but I still couldn't believe it when it finally happened. It was a Saturday evening. I'd spent the entire day avoiding Cindy, Dad, and Rachel, moving through the house like I was walking on glass. Every glance, every whispered conversation behind closed doors made my skin crawl. It felt like they were keeping some terrible secret, one that was just waiting to destroy me. After dinner, Dad called me into the living room. The moment I walked in and saw Cindy sitting there, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face an innocent mask with the faintest hint of a smirk, I knew something was wrong. Dad's expression was stern, almost icy. Rachel sat beside him, her face carefully blank, but her eyes betraying the unease she felt. It was like they were preparing for an intervention, and I was the last to know. "Sit down," Dad said, gesturing toward the empty chair across from them. I took a deep breath, my stomach churning as I sat down. Dad cleared his throat, glancing at Rachel, who gave him a small, reassuring nod. "We've been talking," Dad started, his voice low and strained, "and we don't know what's going on with you anymore." I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Well, what do you mean?" Rachel's tone was firmer. "We've tried to give you every opportunity to come clean, to tell us the truth. But it's clear now that you're hiding something serious. We can't just sit by and pretend everything's fine." My eyes darted to Cindy. She was watching me, calm and composed, with the smallest, most triumphant smirk on her lips. Her eyes gleamed, and I felt sick to my stomach. "I'm not hiding anything," I said, my voice shaky but firm. I turned back to Dad, desperate for him to see the truth. "Everything Cindy said is a lie. She's doing this to hurt me." Dad shook his head slowly, his face hardening. "Why would your sister lie about something like this? She's had nothing but love and concern for you." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow and broken. "Love and concern? She hates me. She's been spreading lies about me, trying to ruin my life, and you're all just falling for it." Rachel put a hand on Dad's shoulder, as if to ground him. "We've tried to believe you," she said softly, though her voice was strained. "But Cindy showed us things, proof. Messages. There are no messages." I snapped, the frustration boiling over. "She made it all up. I don't know how she did it, but she's lying." Dad's expression remained unreadable for a moment, and then he let out a heavy, defeated sigh. "I can't do this anymore," he muttered under his breath, almost as if talking to himself. Then he looked up at me, his face set like stone. "Get out." The words hit me like a slap. "What?" "You heard me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying a weight that crushed me. "I want you out of this house." I stared at him, disbelief and panic clawing at my throat. "You're kicking me out?" Dad looked away, as though he couldn't stand to see me. "You've made your choices, and this is the consequence." "But I didn't do anything." I cried, my voice breaking. "This is all Cindy's doing. How can you not see that?" Rachel stood, her hand still on Dad's shoulder. It's for the best, she said quietly, though her voice wavered. You need to find your own way, away from all these negative influences. I looked at them both, searching for any sign of doubt, of compassion, but there was nothing. Cindy had won. Without another word, I turned and walked to my room, tears streaming down my face. I grabbed a bag and stuffed it with whatever I could reach: clothes, toiletries, my laptop, my favorite book. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. As I walked out the front door, I didn't look back. I couldn't bear to see the faces of the people who'd given up on me, who'd chosen to believe lies over their own daughter. The night air was cold and sharp, a stark contrast to the suffocating warmth of the house I'd just left. I walked down the street, numb, my mind racing with fear and anger. I had nowhere to go. My best friend, Emma, lived nearby, but the thought of showing up at her door in tears, begging for a place to stay, felt like too much. I'd already lost enough dignity. For hours, I just walked, my feet carrying me aimlessly through the empty streets. Eventually, I ended up at an old park, one I used to visit as a kid back when life was simple and things made sense. I found an empty bench, sank onto it, and clutched my bag like it was the only thing tethering me to the world. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, I realized I couldn't sit there forever. I had to figure something out, some kind of plan to survive. I'd always prided myself on being independent, but this was different. I was completely on my own now, and the weight of that realization was crushing. The first few days were the hardest. I used what little money I had saved to stay in a cheap motel on the edge of town, rationing meals and counting every penny. I applied for jobs everywhere I could think of: fast food joints, grocery stores, anywhere that might take a 17-year-old with no real experience. It was humiliating, but I didn't have a choice. Eventually, I got a job at a diner working the evening shift. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay barely covered the basics, but it was something. The other employees were kind enough, though they didn't ask many questions, sensing that I had my reasons for keeping to myself. My manager, Lisa, was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with a tough exterior, but a surprisingly soft heart. One night, after a particularly long shift, she looked at me and said, "Kid, you're stronger than you think. Whatever you're dealing with, just know it won't last forever." Her words stuck with me, offering the first sliver of hope I'd felt in weeks. Maybe, just maybe, I could survive this. For months, I kept my head down and focused on rebuilding my life. I went to school during the day and worked at the diner at night. I didn't hear from my parents, and I didn't dare reach out. Cindy had poisoned them so thoroughly against me that I doubted anything I said would make a difference. Then, one afternoon, as I was getting ready for my shift, I spotted a familiar figure standing across the street. It was Cindy. She was watching me, her expression unreadable, though a faint smirk played on her lips. My heart sank. A chill ran through me as I realized she wasn't done. Cindy had already destroyed my life once, but she was still out there, waiting, watching, ready to strike again. I turned away and went inside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that her shadow was still lingering, a reminder of everything she'd taken from me. Every day was a fight, a battle to keep moving forward. I was alone, abandoned, and betrayed. But one thing was certain: I couldn't let Cindy win. Not after everything she'd done. Standing just a few feet away was someone I hadn't seen in years. Josh, one of Cindy's ex-boyfriends. I barely knew him back when we were in school, though I remembered he and Cindy had been inseparable for a while. He looked different now. Older, more worn down, with an expression that struck me as haunted. The sight of him sent a wave of unease crashing through me, a familiar jolt of tension that came any time I thought of Cindy. Yeah, that's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you with something?" Josh hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one was watching us. "Listen, I know this is weird," he said, scratching the back of his neck, "but I needed to talk to you. About Cindy." The blood drained from my face. "I don't want to talk about her," I replied flatly, turning back to the shelf. I didn't want to dredge up old pain, to reopen wounds I'd spent years trying to close. "Please, just hear me out," he said, his voice quiet but urgent. "I don't know if this will make a difference, but I think you deserve to know the truth." The truth. The word felt heavy, almost ominous. Against my better judgment, I glanced back at him. What are you talking about? Josh took a deep breath and ran a hand through his hair, looking like he didn't want to say what was on his mind. I was with Cindy for a while, he started. She told me things about you, stuff she did. I crossed my arms, bracing myself for whatever he was about to reveal. Part of me wanted to scream at him to leave, to pretend this conversation wasn't happening. But another part of me, a part one couldn't ignore, needed to know. I had to hear it, no matter how much it hurt. Cindy told me she lied about you, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. All those rumors, the stories she spread. She made it all up. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at him, my mind spinning. She admitted it? I asked, my voice trembling. Josh nodded, his gaze shifting away from mine. Yeah, she said she was jealous. She didn't like how much attention you got from other people, especially guys. She felt like you were always overshadowing her, so she decided to make sure people saw you differently. The rush of emotions that hit me was like a flood. Anger, sadness, disbelief. All the things I thought I'd buried long ago came crashing back. For years, I'd blamed myself, wondering if I'd done something wrong, if I deserved the nightmare Cindy had created. And now to find out it had all been because of jealousy, something so petty and senseless, it was almost too much to bear. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, struggling to hold myself together. Josh sighed, rubbing his hands together as if trying to steady himself. I should have said something back then. I knew what she was doing was messed up, but I didn't want to get involved. I was young and stupid, and I thought it was just teenage drama. But after a while it started to eat at me. I couldn't stop thinking about how it messed up your life. I took a shaky breath, my hands trembling. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to yell at him for staying silent for so long, for letting Cindy destroy my life without saying a word. But deep down, I knew he wasn't the real villain here. He was just another pawn in Cindy's twisted game. So she admitted to lying. I said slowly, still trying to process it all. Yeah, Josh nodded. She thought it was funny, or maybe justified somehow. She said she didn't regret it, that you deserved it for always being in the spotlight. I swallowed hard, a fresh wave of pain washing over me. Cindy had taken everything from me, my family, my friends, my reputation, all because she couldn't stand the thought of me being happy. For a long time, we both stood there in silence. Josh shifted uncomfortably, like he wanted to say more, but wasn't sure how. Thank you for telling me, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I appreciate it. Josh looked relieved, though his guilt was still clear. I'm sorry for everything. I know it doesn't change what happened, but I hope it helps, even a little. I forced a small smile, though I didn't feel it. It does. It's good to finally know the truth. We stood there awkwardly for a moment longer before Josh finally turned and walked away. As the door closed behind him, I felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But at the same time, there was an emptiness I couldn't shake. I had the truth now, but what was I supposed to do with it? My family had abandoned me because of Cindy's lies, and even though I had proof, I couldn't bring myself to reopen that wound. I didn't want to drag myself back into that pain. Maybe, in some twisted way, Cindy had won. She'd driven me away, broken my family, and forced me to build a life on my own. But as the days passed, I realized something. I'd survived. I'd rebuilt my life, brick by brick, without her, without my parents, without anyone who had doubted me. Cindy might have taken my past, but she couldn't take my future. Years later, I found myself in a place I never thought possible. I'd built a life, a real, fulfilling life. I had a stable job, a home that felt safe, and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Most surprisingly of all, I found love. Ironically, it was Josh who became the person I could trust. We reconnected slowly, cautiously, but over time, we realized that we understood each other in ways no one else could. He'd seen Cindy's destruction firsthand, and he supported me as I worked to rebuild my life. Somewhere along the way, our shared history turned into something more. When he proposed, it felt like the culmination of everything I'd fought for, a chance to finally be happy, free of my past. We planned a small, intimate wedding, surrounded by friends who'd stood by me through it all. As much as I wanted to leave the past behind, I couldn't help but reach out to my dad, hoping for a sliver of reconciliation. The conversation was polite at first, awkward, even like two strangers trying to find common ground. But when I mentioned that Cindy wouldn't be invited, everything shifted. Either Cindy is invited, Dad said firmly, cutting me off mid-sentence, or I won't be there. It felt like a punch to the stomach. After everything she'd done, after all the lies and pain, he still chose her. I can't do that, Dad, I said, my voice trembling but strong. I won't let her ruin this for me. This day is supposed to be about love and happiness, and Cindy has done nothing but bring me pain. His expression didn't change. She's your sister. Family is family. No, Dad, I replied firmly, my voice steady. Family doesn't hurt you like that. Family doesn't lie and destroy you. His face hardened, and in that moment, I knew I'd lost him for good. I walked away that day, finally letting go of the hope that he'd ever see the truth. On the day of the wedding, I felt a pang of sadness that my father wasn't there. But as I stood beside Josh, surrounded by people who loved and supported me, I realized something. I was free. Free from the chains of my past. Free from Cindy's shadow. For the first time in years, I felt happy. Truly, deeply happy. And nothing, not even Cindy, could take that away from me.